The story of Fort Norfolk begins in 1792 with the French Revolution. On January 21st, 1793, the French king Louis was tried and executed. This led to war with Austria, Prussia, Serbia, Britain, and the United Netherlands, who wanted to reinstate the French monarchy. The United States, being a young country, did not want to get involved in this war. On April 22, 1793, George Washington issued a proclamation of neutrality. He stated,
"Whereas it appears that the duty and interest of the United States require that they should in sincerely good faith adopt and pursue a conduct friendly and impartial towards the belligerent powers."
He made it clear that United States citizens who violated this neutrality could be prosecuted. On April 29, 1793, Thomas Newton, Jr., the commander of the militia in Norfolk, wrote to Henry Lee, the governor of Virginia,
"Our situation is rather alarming. Not a gun mounted, and no militia formed, and a small armed force would be able to lay us under."
He also sent word of news from Charleston, which he did not know how to act on if it happened in Norfolk. He wanted to hear from the governor as soon as possible, as armed vessels would be coming in daily. The news from Charleston was that Edmund Charles Genet, who was the French minister to the United States, had arrived in Charleston, South Carolina. He immediately began to issue privateering commissions in Charleston with the consent of the governor. These commissions authorized the bearers, regardless of their country of origin, to capture British merchant ships and their cargo with the approval and protection of the French government. In other words, legal pirates. On May 2, 1793, Henry Lee, the governor of Virginia, wrote to George Washington about
the very defenseless situation of the town of Norfolk and its proximity to the sea invites the insult and injury of any adventuring pirate who may find it convenient to make the attempt.
He suggested
placing the town and the post in a state of defense to protect it from harm as a result of Washington's neutrality proclamation.
George Washington acknowledged the defenseless situation, which appeared to all the important towns of the extended seacoast of the United States. He found himself restrained from directing any measures that would lead to considerable expense, which there was neither authority nor appropriation by the legislature of the United States. In other words, he could not do anything for the governor of Virginia and the borough of Norfolk without the appropriate approval of Congress. Thomas Newton, Jr., wrote the governor on May 11th requesting the mounting of cannons and other river defenses. He suggested that
Point Comfort and Point Nelson, the former site of Fort Nelson during the American Revolutionary War, would be good places to fortify the river.
On May 16th, 1793, the British consulate in Norfolk, John Hamilton, informed the United States that in Norfolk were the masters of 2 British vessels taken by an armed schooner under French colors. The captain was in the borough of Norfolk, and based on George Washington's proclamation, should be prevented from returning to acts of hostility against British subjects. The British Council's letter reached George Washington, but the legislature had not considered the idea of putting U.S. ports on the defensive, which meant that there was no money to do so, and therefore the president could not comply with the governor's request. He also made it clear that treaties with Holland did not allow them to arm their vessels in United States ports, and such actions should be prevented.
American citizens who engage in hostile activities against nations at peace with the United States will be prosecuted.
On May 24, 1793, the Secretary of War, Henry Knox, wrote to the governor of Virginia that
at the port of Charleston, South Carolina,
2 vessels were commissioned, equipped, and armed as pirates. The President of the United States wants him as Commander-in-Chief of his state to ensure if at any time this occurs in his state, Lee will put a stop to it, detain any vessels used, and notify him of the circumstances of the case.
On July 6, 1793, a French 74-gun ship arrived in Hampton and then sailed into Norfolk, followed by up to 150 smaller ships. On board these ships were a number of passengers who had been driven from Cape Francis, which is now part of Haiti. Cape Francis had been destroyed by a slave uprising and revolution. These unhappy and distressed people reported that husbands, wives, parents, and children were separated in such a manner that they did not know where to find each other. 12,000 were supposed to have been massacred at the Cape. Later that same afternoon, a British privateer from Jamaica put in at Hampton to get wood and water and supposedly to keep out of the way of the 74-gun ship. On July 9th, Thomas Newton, Jr. wrote to the governor that
we need a cruising vessel off our capes because no force on the land can give the necessary assistance to vessels being attacked daily. If the 2 cutters that belong to the United States were armed, they would answer very well.
On August 2nd, 1793, Thomas Newton, Jr. wrote the governor of Virginia,
we have accounts of Mud Island on the Delaware being put in order and a company of militias stationed there to be weekly relieved. Without something of the kind here, our militia can have but little effect. They can only prevent guns from being taken from shore. Vessels armed may do as they please, as muskets in our river cannot command them. 2 batteries, one of each side of the river, could prevent any from sailing. I know your Excellency feels for our situation, and I am sorry you do not have it in your power to place us on a more respectful footing. Our defenseless situation causes insults from all parties which would not happen if they saw the means of preventing them, and at the same time to protect those who might take shelter with us.
On August 27, 1793, the British ship Orion, a 74-gun ship of the line, arrived at Hampton Roads for supplies, provisions, and water. The Orion brought in a French privateer as a prize. Also on August 27th, William Lindsay from Norfolk's collector's office wrote to the governor of Virginia,
a vessel which was built at Suffolk by Mr. John Cowper, or under his directions, now in his port. I have sent an officer on board to examine her, who reported to me that he saw no guns on board her, but that she was fitted for them, and there is no doubt that they have guns in their possession to be taken on board at a convenient time.
On September 20th, 1793, John Hamilton, the British consul in Norfolk, sent a letter to the governor complaining that the French privateer was in Portsmouth and that he was taking on supplies and wanted to exchange an equal number of 6-pound cannons for 4-pound cannons. The British consul objected that this violated the terms of America's neutrality. On November 28, 1793, Robert Taylor, the mayor of Norfolk, wrote to the governor that
the ship of war Daedalus had arrived that evening. Now had her sails unbent and appears to be repairing her rigging.
A letter from the British consul in Norfolk, John Hamilton, confirmed that the ship arrived for provisions and some repairs. On December 22, 1793, John Hamilton, the British consul at Norfolk, wrote to the governor,
the British brigantine Cunningham, bound from Ireland to Americas with immigrants, was captured off the Capes of Virginia by the French privateer sometime in September last and carried to Baltimore and is alleged that the brig was taken or captured within the jurisdiction of the United States.
All of these events in 1793 showed that the British and French warships could continue to arrive in Norfolk, and there was no defense in the area to control this. Tensions between these military powers continued to increase in Virginia waters. The British were also seizing American merchant ships that were trading with French colonies in the Caribbean in 1793. When Congress met again in 1794, they were concerned about the rising threats along the East Coast. March 19, 1794, Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, wrote to Henry Lee,
Congress passed a bill for fortification of ports. Norfolk was addressed.
On March 20th, 1794, George Washington signed into law an act to provide for the defense of certain ports and harbors in the United States. This act authorized the construction of forts in 20 harbors in the United States, including Norfolk.